All right, welcome to the Social Thread podcast. Social Thread is a nonprofit where you can be in community, where you can belong, you can thrive, and you can explore your faith on your own terms. And I am Robert Payne. I am the Community Development Director here at Social Thread. And with me always is...
Rob Reinders, founder of Social Thread.
Awesome. And we have a special guest with us today. Special guest, will you introduce yourself and who you are, what you're doing?
My name is Tony Minear, and I am the pastor at Church of the Beatitudes here in Phoenix, Arizona.
Awesome. And we are so excited that you are here with us, our very first guest in the podcast.
Number one.
I'm lucky.
One.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm really excited. Tony really means a lot to me, and has been a large part of my faith journey over this last several years. And so it's only fitting to have him here. And so anyway, hey, Rob, why don't you kind of kick us off about why we brought Tony on and what is our very first question?
Yeah. So we finished kind of this introductory podcast series, Tony, for this Explore Your Faith podcast, where we went through, I can't count. I want to say it was 12 guideposts based around we're going to use a lot of imagery here, what we call three pillars of love God, love neighbor, love yourself. And one of those guideposts under the love God pillar, we call explore sacred text. So what we basically are doing is sort of laying like a roadmap, maybe, that, you know, it's still a choose your own adventure in our heads, but just some like, hey, what does it mean to explore faith and explore it on my own terms? And one of the things people have used in practicing their faith for forever, whether, I guess they weren't always text, but maybe sometimes there were oral traditions or oral stories, but most of the major world religions and practices of spirituality have some sort of, you know, book or text or scriptures that they follow. And, you know, for Christians, that's the Bible, made up of the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. And we've been doing these Explore Your Faith meetups for the last 5-6 weeks now. And, you know, the Bible keeps coming up for people who, most of them are maybe they're Christians, kind of on the edge Christians, or what we might call recovering Christians, have had some rough experiences with religion in the past,
right,
and are still want to explore their faith, but are struggling with, well, how does this Bible thing apply? It seems so outdated. It seems a little archaic, especially the Hebrew Bible, or what we call the Old Testament. Does it even apply anymore? I'm down with Jesus and Jesus' teachings, but what's the Bible all about, and is it even worth it in the 21st century? So, real easy softball question we're teeing up for you.
So Robert won.
Yeah, but Robert tells me you're an expert in biblical historical context. So I don't know. Maybe if you want to jump in wherever you want on that question and give it a shot.
Yeah. I think for me, I grew up in a very, very fundamental Christian denomination. And the biggest thing that changed me was I started reading the Bible, and I should have stopped, because the more I read it, the more I realized it was messing me up. And I'm talking about just literally reading it, not reading books about it, but actually reading it. And the more I read it, the more I began to realize that a lot of the things that I've been told, a lot of things that I've been taught, didn't necessarily fly with what I was seeing. And to this day, I have continued to be surprised every time I open the Bible. Literally, every time I open it and read it, I'm seeing something that I've never seen before. And so I went and pursued a doctorate. I have a PhD in biblical studies with an emphasis in Old Testament. So I love the Old Testament. And I think, to me, the issues that you guys are talking about really boils down to, I think, how you look at the Bible and how you perceive the Bible will have a dramatic effect upon your view of God, and then in turn your view of humanity. I think those three, those really inform each other all the time. And so for me, once my view of the Bible began to shift, then my view of God began to shift, and I actually ended up with a picture of God that I never envisioned. And then therefore that dichotomy between the Old Testament and the New Testament went away. And instead of seeing it as contrast, I saw it one of evolving.
Can you say more about that picture that developed? I know when I talk to folks who they sort of want to skip over the imagery of any violence or judgment,
Right.
or God. If you just read it on the surface, God does look like a very vengeful, violent God that's punishing people, enslaving them, wiping them out through battles and genocide, and
Right.
all that not fun to talk about stuff. So how do you look at that imagery and come up with the picture of God you do?
Well, I think for me, it goes back to is two things. Number one, is the Bible a revealed word of God in the sense that God does a direct revelation to humanity? If you see it that way, then you're probably going to see God as being something that is very static and very set. However, if you see revelation as more of a process that takes over time, then I think you have the idea that God is evolving just as human beings are evolving. Maybe God's self is not evolving, but our understanding of God is evolving. And so I think those two come into play. The other one is how you begin to read literally the first two chapters of the Bible. Genesis 1 and 2. If you take it literal, then you're going to believe in a creation, and you're going to believe in a very young earth, versus if you believe in evolution, then you're going to read Genesis 1 and 2 a little bit differently. And that then affects how human beings evolved into religious people, and how over time their idea of a God evolved. And so it really is it static, an image of God, or is it an evolving picture of God? For me, I tend to go with the evolving, which then explains some of these images that we find in the Old Testament. And it really makes sense why they believed the way they did, because it worked for them at that point.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about like the context of maybe like Genesis was written in, because that really does frame
Right.
the rest of the story. And to me, once you kind of understand that context, it's like, oh, to us that looks like archaic, but to people back then that was pretty radical, I think.
Right. I think there's a difference between when Genesis, looking at it from the time when the author actually wrote, versus the setting in which the author is telling the story. So if I go back into the setting that the writer is telling the story, you basically have a picture very early on of a nomadic. Instead of being hunters, gatherers, human beings are now becoming more agrarian. They are raising livestock. And we find this especially with where the main character of Genesis comes in is going to be Abraham. And everything up to him is kind of a prequel. And then once Abraham comes on the scene, then we really get into Israel and the movement starts. But Abraham is seen as this nomadic individual who's traveling all over. And one of the things I recently discovered was that even in the land of Palestine at that time, different ideas of God were being developed depending upon where you lived. So if you lived more along the coast, then you saw God in the sense of the God of the sea. If you lived more up in the rainy area, more up in the mountains, then you would tend to see a God of thunder, a God of rain. If you lived in the arid areas, then desert, you would have a different idea of God. And so which I find fascinating, is because Abraham is really, he's traveling all over the place. And he's taking not only his picture of God from Mesopotamia, but he's now taking all these other ideas of God and he's molding them and shaping them all together. And over hundreds of years, they slowly develop an idea of God, and they moved from a polytheistic idea of many, many gods. So one of the things that Israel was unique for was a monotheistic God. So again, it's, for me, this is evolving picture of God as they were having these different experiences and trying to make sense. I mean, today we look out, we're supposed to get monsoons, right, by the end of the week. Well, how do we know that? Well, science, right? But how do you, if you need a bunch of rain and you need your crops to have rain, how, you have no idea where it comes from. Well, you turn to the gods, because the gods at least are in control of nature. And if you can make the gods happy or appease the gods through sacrifices and obedience, then voila, you might get your rain.
Yeah. Yeah. If we started asking the question about this and kind of doing a deep dive into this evolving nature, is that, what is your Tony? What is your if someone said to you, the God that I see in the Old Testament is not the same God that seems like it's in the New Testament,
Right.
Yet if you really read the Gospels, Jesus does pronounce curses upon certain cities, and so there are like notions of this like wrathful vengeance still.
Yeah, Revelation. Read Revelation. That'll scare you.
Right. So what would you say though to somebody who said, well, I just don't see the two connected? Yeah.
Well, again, I think it goes back to if you see a static God versus an evolving God. If you have an evolving God, then to me, one of the greatest stories is the story that takes place in the battle between Moses and Pharaoh, and which is really a battle between the gods also, because early on it talks about that Moses, he basically, when he gets his call, he says, I'm not very good at talking, so can you bring someone else to help? And then you get Aaron, which ends up being the line of the priest. And so he comes in and he says, okay, I'll be your spokesman. And it's interesting, the writer says that Moses will be as God to Aaron. And we know that the pharaohs were seen as a representative of God. So this was not only a battle between Moses and Pharaoh, but they were representatives of God. And who needs a loving, forgiving God in that story? I mean, you would have a wussy God. Who wants a wussy God when you're talking about getting freedom and coming out of being enslaved? So I think they're imagery of God. And if, we read about in Joshua and Judges, where again, what would happen if, you need to take over the land. So you go in and say, hey, do you mind if we live here with you guys and just kind of hang out together? And they would say, no. But instead, if you believe that your God commanded you to do that, then man, what fervor you have to go in and fight, in the name of your God, and which again is called holy wars. You would go in and you would do, which wasn't unique to Israel. So Israel was a product of their culture. I mean, other nations believed their God was telling them to go to battle. So it wasn't just Israel that was doing this. So very early on, you do get this picture of a very ferocious God. Again, to me, it makes sense. But later on, once they're settled, once they have a monarchy, then all of a sudden their view of God begins to change. And instead of seeing God as this God of nature and this God of unpredictability, what's fascinating to me is God actually begins to no longer be tied to nature. God begins to be tied to humanity. And then they begin to talk of God as a human being. And God begins to have the traits like they have. So they begin to understand about forgiveness. They begin to understand about how it is that people really get along with each other. And if you keep beating each other up, you're probably not going to be productive. But if you can get along, if you can forgive. So I think if you see God as static, I think you're going to have problems with the New Testament and Old Testament. But if you see God as evolving, which by the time you move into the Gospels, it's right there. I mean, Jesus said, you've heard it say, but I say unto you. So you get this, again, Jesus is a great Jewish teacher. He takes what was said and he gives new application for the time and context in which you're alive.
I love how Jesus he's never throwing out the Old Testament. He's, I think, cutting through the noise because that's thousands of years of people trying to understand why they're suffering.
Yeah, and
right?
Rob, I think that's why I call Jesus a good Jewish rabbi, because
Yeah.
I mean, look at Isaiah. More than likely, Isaiah was written in 3 different sections with editors involved somehow in all that process. And what's amazing is just one Old Testament book, Isaiah, and the writer writes down, and then the next one comes along and disagrees with the first writer, but like you just said, he doesn't throw it out. He keeps it and he quotes it again, but then he gives it new meaning. And I think in today's day and age, we have this tendency that if we disagree with someone, we want to, throw that all out rather than saying, look, this is the way it used to be. This is the way we see it now. So yeah, I think you're dead on, Robert. I mean, Rob, as far as Jesus, he was in a tradition that the Old Testament had, and then Jesus continues it.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with someone the other day on this topic, and I explained a lot of what we're talking about here to them. Like, this is why I don't think we can throw it out. And they said, yeah, but that is so hard for people to understand. Like, you have to explain the context to them. You have to go in. Jesus's words seem so plain that we can, just take those literally. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love God with all your heart and your soul and your mind. Can't we just take that and we can get rid of the Old Testament because it takes too much effort to understand? Now, I don't want to be judgmental towards my friend who said that, but I don't know. Should we just throw things out because they're hard?
Oh no, I think, well, if you want to disagree with something and because you disagree with it, you throw it out, then yeah, throw it out. But if you can learn to disagree with it and keep it and respect it and value it, then it's like, yeah, keep it. And I think the biggest one would be the picture that you have in the Old Testament very early on is this idea, if you remember before the flood, that you have this dome that covers the earth, and the windows of heaven are broken open, and that's where the rain comes from. And then they believe that the core of the earth was water. And so the water comes, gushing up. That's an image that we don't have of the Old Testament, of our world anymore, our cosmology. So does that mean we throw out Genesis? No. It's just that was their worldview. And if we can respect that, then that tells us a lot about how they saw God and how they saw each other. So again, I think if you have this idea that if it's wrong or if you don't agree with it, then you throw it out, then yeah, throw it out. But if you can value the differences and learn from the differences, then to me, that makes it even that much more exciting to read the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
How do we use the Bible on in our daily lives? You say you read it often,
right?
And it wows you every time you open it. What are some practical applications in this day and age?
Well, I think one of them that I find is, especially growing up in a more fundamental denomination, it was more of this spiritual, kind of this emotional feeling I was trying to get from it. And I think that was safe because once I brought my mind into it, then all of a sudden I began to realize that, oops, I shouldn't be really thinking too hard about what I'm reading. Because I think once you really begin to think about it, then you bring your mind in, and then your spirit almost has to realign with that. And so there's always this shifting. I used to be a professor, and I would tell my students, when I taught Introduction to the Old Testament, I would tell them, if you're happy with what you believe, don't read the Bible. But if you're going to read it, don't read it very often. I mean, and read it very superficially. Don't really read it because it'll mess you up. And I think that's what, for me, so I try to read it every day. And every time I read it, I'm coming and I'm engaging both my mind and my spirit. So I'm trying to not just say, okay, what emotional thing what little nugget can I get to apply today? But all of a sudden, I tend to use my mind, and then all of a sudden, I'll get these wow moments. Like, for example, I was reading Genesis 12 this morning and talking about how um, Abraham went down to Egypt during the drought and basically says to his wife, hey, say you're my sister, which she probably may have been his half sister. Say you're my sister so that Pharaoh won't kill me and he'll take you. Well, if you read it carefully, basically, um, she became Pharaoh's wife. And we don't know how long. He said he lived in the land. So I used to think it was like a day or two. And then Pharaoh got wise, and it's not. So then all of a sudden you begin to think about the element of trust and what is really important in life. Is it, so those were the kind of the questions that began to ponder in my mind, but I got those questions because I was really looking at what the text was trying to say.
Yeah. What's popping out from the Bible for you during, this time where we're going through the COVID-19 pandemic, and also the racial injustice happening in our continuing to happen in our country. It's not like it's just been happening, but and the response to it, the fight for justice.
I think I read occasionally about some pastors, some theologians. They try to find those parallels. Like, for example, when the immigration thing was really going big back in 2016, 17, people were talking about Israel coming out of the land of Egypt and they were prisoners. I think if you want to find those direct connections, if that works for you, then great. I think what I try to look for is the overall tone and tenor of the text. And I think as I read the Old Testament and then into the New Testament, to me, there are some underlying things there. Some of them, for example, is this sense of trust. Basically, when you come to a point in your life where you don't know what the answers are, you just kind of have to sit still and go, okay, I got to have to trust. And I think this is a perfect example of, Israel coming out of Egypt. They come to the sea. Again, I don't take this story literally, but I think it's a great analogy of they come to the sea, this foreboding barrier in their lives. So like what we see with the racial injustice, COVID, it's this huge barrier in your life. And the text basically says, tell the people to stand still and be quiet. And you kind of wait for what's going to happen next. And I think that's sometimes we want to see God, like, if we pray to God, God somehow going to intervene and we might be able to see that. I think there's sometimes when maybe we just need to stand still, be quiet, and just wait for the mystery and see what happens. And just trust that something's going to happen. And when it happens, we'll have to take the first step and then the next step, and then we'll get our way through it.
Yeah, I love that because it especially in today's day and age, it feels like we always have to fill that space with our own thoughts, our own opinions, and especially when we've been drowning out a lot of voices that don't get heard.
Yes.
I love that idea of, hey, maybe, and especially for some folks, it's time to zip it and listen to that. Where's that still small voice of God, right?
Yeah, or even listen to the silence.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, but a lot of times what I hear people saying is God said this, God said that. It's like, well, wow, is that really God? Or did you just not eat something that didn't agree with you last night? I don't know. Sometimes I think it's best to step back and go, it's easier to look back and come to conclusions than it is to look forward. And so to me, I really relish the mystery of God. And there's a fabulous book. It's written by a man named Jack Miles. It's called God, a Biography. And I saw Rob, you noted in your head. The thing that's amazing is God starts out, according to Jack Miles, as this young rookie God, and he's overly engaged with creation and humanity. And by the end of the book, you have this wise, mature God, and he's quiet. He doesn't say anymore. He just doesn't do anything. He's learned and I think that's, again, this is an idea, but that maybe as we evolve in our spiritual lives, it's not maybe so much God that is changing as it is our perception of God and what we make God to be. Um, so yeah, it's fascinating. I would agree with you.
Yeah. Robert, last question, if you got it.
Yeah, sure. I really loved how you started to talk about the idea of context.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, maybe just a quick contextual, like where when we start talking about Genesis and we start talking about the Hebrew Bible, where just quickly, where did that all start to formulate? So, where that started to become written down and collected and started to kind of be followed and put together.
Yeah, I wish I could just tell you a simple answer on that one, but
Mm-hmm.
there's so many different theories out there and hypothesis. And to be honest, scholars are continuing to guess. I mean, you have a very conservative view that Moses wrote the first 5 books, and then apparently they hauled them around wherever they went, and they were able to preserve them. And that's one view. And the other one is a very liberal view would be that none of it was written down until the time of the exile or after exile. So literally, you have these different ideas out there. I think that to me, what I would encourage people to do is just 2 things. Number one, realize that the Bible, you can read it as a book, literally just like you would any other book. Start at the beginning, go to the end. And I think that is a way of reading that you're going to get a story that is different, and you don't need any historical information. You just read it. The other one is you begin to see the Bible as more of a library, each one of these individually, and each one has their context and when it was written, what it was addressing, those situations. I think there's so many different ways to read the Bible. And that's why, again, I find it so fascinating, because every time I come back to it, I'm at a different place and I'm seeing it from a different place. And I may have read some information that helped me. It's just an experience. So yeah, I wish I could give you, Robert, an easy answer on that one. But again, it would depend upon what position on that spectrum where you want to land and how you see it.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, I love that. I think my takeaway from this whole interview was read it as a library. You can read the Bible as a library.
Yeah,
I think that's great.
And I think one of the things with liberal or progressive type Christians or the marginalized Christian is, I think we've almost like we've given the Bible up, and we've let conservatives, evangelicals, kind of, they own the Bible more. And I think we're missing out on something that's beautiful. And I would encourage everyone to read it. Doesn't mean you have to understand it, because there's other books I read I don't understand, but I would read it, and it slowly begins to give you insights, and it's just an awesome experience that I have found.
Well, that's awesome. Tony, thank you so much for taking your time with us today. I cannot tell you how enjoyable this time has been.
Well, thank you. I mean, this is what I love to talk about. I mean, I literally love to talk. It's just my passion. I find it so fascinating.
Well, that's good. Well, hey, if you are a listener of this podcast and you're listening for the first time, you can find us at socialthread.org. And if you are saying to yourself, boy, I really want to talk about this some more with some other people, well, that is what we are here for. You can go to the website and click Get Involved, and we will reach out, and you can explore your faith on your own terms. If you have found this experience meaningful, you can, of course, make a donation at socialthread.org/support. And again, thank you everybody for your time, and thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. Tony, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, everyone.
All right, we'll see you next time.